I want to join others in this House in extending my deepest sympathies to the family of Kim Damte, who was brutally killed in a savage attack by Hamas. Kim was just 22, and like so many people her age, loved attending music festivals with her friends. She was doing that last weekend when Hamas opened fire. More than 260 young people were massacred at that site. Elsewhere in southern Israel, more than 1,200 people have been confirmed dead. Thousands more have been injured. The terror and devastation experienced by those caught up in the attack is unimaginable. So too is the terror experienced by Palestinian mothers cradling their children, desperate to shield them from the bombs dropping indiscriminately over their heads. It's impossible to imagine the devastation experienced by those in Gaza who, as we speak, are pulling the bodies of loved ones from the rubble that was formerly their home, their school, their hospital. More than 1,300 people, including more than 320 children, have been killed in Gaza by Israeli attacks. I can understand and empathise with the rage, grief and fear of the Israeli people. It has triggered generational trauma that is raw and real. Sadly, there has been little acknowledgement on the world stage of the generational trauma of the Palestinian people. A people who have been driven from their land, corralled and confined into open-air prisons, forced to exist under an apartheid regime that has inflicted injustice after injustice on the people of Palestine, a regime that has continuously massacred civilians. This has been the lived reality of the Palestinian people for decades, and we cannot become desensitised to that horror. Taoiseach, the indiscriminate murder of Israeli civilians by Hamas fighters must be condemned unequivocally. There can be no justification for the deliberate targeting of civilians. The decision by the Israeli government to blockade the supply of food, water and energy from Gaza is unprecedented and it's horrifying. Later today, it's expected that the fuel operating the generators in Gaza's hospitals will run out. Taoiseach, what's happening is a war crime. Civilians are being deliberately slaughtered, and the international community can't muster up a single word of criticism for the Israeli government. More than 2 million people live in Gaza, 50% of them are children. It is the most densely populated open-air prison on the planet. So when Israel drops its bombs, civilians have nowhere to run. Now they don't have food, water or electricity. Soon the internet will also die and they will be completely cut off from the world. Taoiseach, the people of Gaza have days, a week at most. I'm deeply concerned at the EU response to this crisis and the failure of Ursula von der Leyen to condemn the Israeli government for its bombardment of Gaza. Do you share my concerns about the EU's response to this?
Thank you. Taoiseach, please.
Well, first of all, I appreciate the deputies raising this issue, and I've articulated, like you, our deepest sympathies to the family of Kim Damte, and also our horror at what has happened last Saturday in respect of Hamas's attack on Israel. And I think it can be very challenging at times in situations like this, in juxtaposing one atrocity or in any way, and I know you're not doing this, but the enormity of that atrocity we should not lose sight of, and we should never fail to call out, and then move on. And I know you're not doing that, but I just want to say that because it was a moment in time when thousands of people moved over a border, up to 1,500 we were told, and that all have to be verified, but murdered 1,300 and injured maybe 2,500. But equally, and just to say, we should be careful of saying the EU response, because I can assure you the response of Commissioner Varhelyi is not the European Union's response. And I spoke at the Foreign Affairs Council during the week, and the vast majority of member states were very clear, obviously and unreservedly condemning the Hamas atrocity, but also in making it clear that humanitarian aid and development aid to Palestinians would continue, both to the Palestinian Authority, but also to Palestinians, and I was very strongly of the view and asserted the position of Ireland, that would be completely a counterproductive but a morally wrong thing to do. And that we must, if anything now, and I've asked my officials to work with the United Nations and to work with European partners in respect of additional aid that will be required for Gazans, and to make sure that we can develop humanitarian corridors into Gaza in the short term to get aid. We don't need an Old Testament approach to this, rather a New Testament approach. Ultimately, we need to move on a pathway to peace and reconciliation. It cannot be an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth approach, would be my view. We must distinguish between ordinary Palestinians going about their daily lives and those who lead Hamas, and those who orchestrated this attack by Hamas. We cannot punish, not we, but people shouldn't, Israel cannot punish innocent Gazans in indiscriminate bombings, which will result and has resulted in the death of children and the death of women and innocent civilians. And I'm very clear on that. And I understand Israel has a right to self-defense. Israel has a right to deal with Hamas, because Hamas has declared war on Israel and has murdered its civilians. But the entire population of Gaza cannot be collateral damage in terms of that response to Hamas. And international law must apply. And President Biden said yesterday that Israel's response must uphold the rules of war. The European Union, the vast majority of the Foreign Affairs Council, are very, very clear that international law must apply. We're all signatories to the Geneva Convention.
Right. Thank you, Taoiseach. We're way out of time.
Sorry, apologies.
Deputy Kern.
Thanks for your reply, Taoiseach. In your next reply, you might just clarify if that means you do or don't share my concern about the EU response. When Russia targeted civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, the EU Commission President was when Russia targeted Ukraine infrastructure, the European President was unequivocal. She stated that Russia attacks against civilian infrastructure, especially electricity, are war crimes. Cutting off men, women and children from water, electricity and heating with winter coming, she said, these are acts of pure terror and we have to call it as such. And Taoiseach, war crimes are not defined by the identity of the perpetrator, they're defined by the act itself. And cutting off fuel, food, electricity and energy to more than 2 million people is a clear war crime. Not only that, she's failed to even publicly express any concern for the more than 2 million Palestinians trapped under relentless bombing. Previously, you stressed the necessity of working alongside the EU in terms of advancing the cause of Palestine. But it's clear that the majority of the member states won't speak out against Israel's treatment of Palestine, and that the EU Commission President hasn't done that herself. So we can play a powerful role, I think, as a neutral arbiter, if we're willing to act, to lead and to do so quickly. The people of Gaza don't have the luxury of time, so Taoiseach, what are you doing at an EU level to work towards an intervention to facilitate a pathway to a ceasefire, talks and peace? And do you agree, or what is your position on the EU response? Do you think?
Yeah, I think, could I say that, I said to you earlier that I don't accept your assessment of the EU response, is my point. One of the biggest donors to Palestine is the European Union. So let's not present the EU as somehow a body that's out to undermine Palestinians. There could be strands of opinion within the European Union. There could be some member states that don't share our position or that have a different perspective. But fundamentally, the biggest financial donor to the West Bank, to the Gaza, is the European Union, about 700 million. We allocated, I think, 16 million this year. I spoke with the Palestinian Foreign Minister 2 days ago, Foreign Minister Maliki. I spoke to the Palestinian Authority Secretary General this morning. You know, we've been very clear that our humanitarian or development aid continues. And also that, as I said earlier, before it was got off the Geneva Convention, international law must be adhered to and must be applied. And the vast majority of member states are very clear, very clear in terms of continuing developmental aid and humanitarian aid, but also
Thank you,
calling ensuring that any interventions have to be in accordance with international law, or any attacks
Deputy
and so on.
Richard.